So, let's talk about Great Britain. It's a pretty wild story, right? We're going to dive into how this one pretty small island managed to build this massive global empire, and then how it all just, well, faded away.
Yeah, I'm sure you've heard this one before. And it wasn't just a cool saying, it was literally true. The British Empire was so enormous, it stretched across the entire globe. So no matter what time it was, the sun was always shining on some piece of British territory. It just perfectly captures the mind-boggling scale of their power, doesn't it? And that really gets to the heart of what we're looking at today. How on earth did this little island off the coast of Europe become a global superpower? I mean, really, think about it. And then, the flip side of the coin, how did all that power just fall apart? Let's dig in and find out.
Okay, so to really get how Britain rose to power, you gotta go way, way back to its, well, pretty chaotic beginnings. I mean, its early history is anything but unified. It's really a story of one invasion after another, and every single group of conquerors left their own indelible mark on the island's identity.
You look at the timeline, and for centuries, it's just this constant churn of conquest. You had the Romans, right? Then they leave, and in come the Anglo-Saxons from Germany. After them, the Vikings, of course. They didn't just raid, they settled huge chunks of the country. And each of these groups totally reshaped the culture, the language, you name it. But the real game changer, the one that put the final piece in the puzzle for England as we know it, that all went down in 1066.
And that brings us to this incredible story. So, William, the Duke of Normandy, is about to invade England. He steps off the boat, and what happens? He trips and faceplants right on the beach. You can imagine his soldiers, right? They're superstitious, and they're thinking, oh no, this is a terrible omen. We're doomed. But William, he thinks fast. He grabs 2 handfuls of sand, holds them up and yells, "Look, the land of England is in my hands!" Just like that, he flips a total disaster into this epic declaration of destiny. And, well, he wasn't wrong. He wins the Battle of Hastings, becomes William the Conqueror, and completely changes the future of England forever.
So England is now under Norman control. The threat of outside invasion is kind of settled down, but the next big fight, it wasn't going to be against a foreign army. Nope, this one was internal. It was a massive power struggle between the king and his own people, and this fight would end up shaping the very idea of Western democracy.
Fast forward to 1215. You've got this group of powerful barons who are just completely fed up with King John and his abuses of power. So what do? They basically force him to sign this document, the Magna Carta. Now, let's be clear, it wasn't a democratic constitution like we think of today, but it did something absolutely revolutionary. It established the principle that everyone, even the king, had to follow the law. This was the tiny seed that would eventually grow into parliament and the whole idea of a constitutional monarchy.
All right, the next huge power struggle was all about religion. For hundreds of years, England had been a Catholic country, with everyone's allegiance pointing to the Pope in Rome. But then comes King Henry VIII. He wants a divorce. The Pope says no way, so Henry makes this absolutely radical decision. He just says, fine, I'll start my own church. And he does. He breaks away from Rome completely, creates the Church of England, and puts himself at the head of it. This move basically nationalized religion, pulling a massive amount of power away from a foreign leader and concentrating it right there in England.
So, after all this fighting, with invaders, with the king, with the church, England has really started to forge its own identity. It's a nation shaped by conflict, by law, and by religion. The next logical step? It was time to unite the whole island, to bring the different kingdoms together into one single, powerful state. This was going to be the launch pad for everything that came next. And this is how they did it. First up, in 1707, you have the Act of Union. This joins England and Scotland, and boom, you've got Great Britain. That's when we get the famous Union Jack flag, combining the flags of the 2 nations. Then, a little less than 100 years later, in 1801, another Act of Union brings Ireland into the mix. And there you have it. The United Kingdom is officially born. This created an incredibly powerful and unified home base, ready to take on the world.
And the result of all that unity? A complete explosion onto the world stage. The 1800s, the Victorian era, that was the absolute zenith. I mean, it was a perfect storm, really. They had political stability at home, they had tons of coal to fuel the factories, and they had resources pouring in from the colonies. All of this meant the Industrial Revolution kicked off here first. And with the world's most powerful navy protecting its trade routes, Britain just became the undisputed dominant force on the planet, both economically and imperially. But as we all know, that kind of global dominance could never last forever. The 20th century rolls around, and with it come 2 absolutely devastating world wars.
Now, Britain was on the winning side in both conflicts, but that victory came with a staggering price tag. A price that, in the end, would cost it the entire empire.
Let's just look at the numbers for a second, because the economic hit was catastrophic. In 1914, heading into World War I, Britain was the world's bank. It was the leading creditor nation. By the time 1945 rolls around after the Second War, yeah, it was victorious, but it was also completely bankrupt, shattered. The entire financial foundation that held the empire up had just crumbled to dust. And without money, you simply can't afford to run a global empire.
So, what happened next was pretty much inevitable, right? In 1947, the jewel in the crown of the empire, India, gains its independence. And that one event was like pulling a thread that unravels the whole sweater. It triggered this massive wave of decolonization. Suddenly, colonies all across Africa, Asia, the Caribbean, they're all demanding and winning their freedom. The empire was just coming apart at the seams, and it was happening incredibly fast.
Now, the end of the empire didn't mean the end of Britain itself, of course, but it did mean the country had to go through this profound reinvention. It had to figure out, okay, who are we now? It needed a whole new identity, a new role in a world that it no longer ruled.
And if there's one person who really symbolizes this huge transition, it's got to be Queen Elizabeth II. Just think about it. Her reign started in 1952 and lasted for an incredible 70 years. She really was a bridge between two worlds. When she took the throne, Britain was still an empire, and she was the one who oversaw its final transformation into the modern Commonwealth, which is, a voluntary group of independent countries.
And that brings us right back to the big question, the one we're left with today. This is a nation that went from a Roman outpost to a global empire, and now it's a post-Brexit nation trying to find its footing. Its whole story is one of constant reinvention. So after that incredible rise and that dramatic fall, the question is, what's next? What place will Britain carve out for itself in this century?